I'm Sarah Mitchell, and 3 weeks ago, I watched my husband of 28 years being led away in handcuffs while Detective Sullivan read him his rights. The same man who kissed me goodbye every morning, who coached our son's little league team, who held my hand during my mother's funeral, was now facing charges that would make headlines across our small town of Millbrook, Ohio. As the patrol car disappeared around the corner of our quiet suburban street, I clutched a manila envelope containing bank statements, photographs, and DNA test results that had shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. The secret child I discovered 6 months ago hadn't just revealed David's infidelity, she had led investigators to something far more sinister buried beneath the old oak trees in Oakwood Cemetery. What started as a wife's desperate search for answers had uncovered a truth so dark that even seasoned detectives struggled to believe it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday in February. I was grading third-grade math tests at our kitchen table when the mail arrived with its usual assortment of bills and advertisements. David had already left for his job at Pine Valley Insurance, kissing my forehead and promising to pick up groceries on his way home, just like he had done thousands of times before. Our daughter Jessica was finishing her marketing degree at Ohio State, while our son Ryan was in his senior year studying engineering. At 47, I felt settled in the rhythm of our life together, comfortable in the predictability that comes with nearly 3 decades of marriage. The envelope that would unravel everything was addressed to David, but the return address caught my attention immediately: Millbrook General Hospital, Department of Genetic Services. My stomach dropped as I stared at the official seal, remembering that neither of us had any recent medical appointments that would require genetic testing. David was notoriously healthy, refusing to see doctors unless absolutely necessary, and I had just completed my annual physical 2 months earlier with perfect results. My hands trembled as I held the envelope up to the kitchen window, trying to see through the paper without actually opening it. 28 years of marriage had taught me to respect David's privacy, but something about this correspondence felt different, urgent in a way that made my chest tighten with unexplained anxiety. I set it aside and tried to focus on the math tests spread before me, but the words blurred together as my mind raced through possibility. When David arrived home that evening, carrying grocery bags and wearing his usual tired but genuine smile, I watched him sort through the mail with casual disinterest until his fingers stopped on the hospital envelope. The color drained from his face so quickly that I initially thought he might be having a heart attack. His hands shook as he tore it open, his eyes scanning the contents with growing horror before he quickly folded the papers and shoved them into his jacket pocket. "Everything okay, honey?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light and unassuming. David's response was a masterclass in deflection, explaining that it was probably just follow-up paperwork from his physical last year, nothing to worry about, just bureaucratic nonsense from the hospital's billing department. But I had been married to this man for over half my life, and I knew when he was lying. The way he avoided eye contact, the nervous laugh that didn't reach his eyes, the way he immediately busied himself with unpacking groceries while talking about tomorrow's weather forecast, all confirmed what my instincts were screaming. That night, as David slept beside me with unusual restlessness, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly in the darkness, trying to make sense of what I had witnessed. In 28 years of marriage, David had never hidden medical information from me. When he had his appendix removed 12 years ago, he had called me from the emergency room himself. When his cholesterol levels came back elevated, he had immediately shared the results and asked for my help in changing his diet. The secrecy surrounding this envelope felt completely out of character, which made it all the more terrifying. The next morning, I called in sick to Riverside Elementary for the first time in 3 years, claiming a stomach bug that wasn't entirely fictional given how nauseated I felt with worry. After David left for work, I searched through his jacket pockets with the guilt of someone betraying their most sacred trust, but finding nothing except breath mints and old gas station receipts. The hospital envelope had vanished, probably locked away in his office desk or destroyed entirely. Linda Harper had been my neighbor and closest friend for 15 years, ever since she and her husband moved into the house across the street. She was the kind of friend who could read my mood from my posture as I walked to my mailbox, which is exactly what happened when she found me sitting on my front porch that afternoon, staring at nothing and trying to process my growing suspicion. "Sarah, you look like someone stole your favorite coffee mug," Linda said, settling into the wicker chair beside me with the casual familiarity of someone who had shared countless conversations on this same porch. When I explained about the mysterious envelope and David's strange reaction, her expression grew serious in a way that told me my concerns weren't unfounded. Linda worked as a medical receptionist at Millbrook General, and while she couldn't access patient records directly, she understood the hospital's processes better than most people. Genetic Services doesn't send out routine paperwork, she explained, her voice dropping to a whisper even though we were alone. They only get involved when there are paternity questions, inherited disease concerns, or legal issues requiring DNA verification. The word paternity hung in the air between us like a physical presence, heavy and impossible to ignore. I had never suspected David of infidelity, never had reason to question his faithfulness or dedication to our family. He worked reasonable hours, came home every evening, and accounted for his time in ways that seemed genuine and transparent. The idea that he might have another child somewhere seemed absurd, like something that happened to other families in daytime television drama. But Linda's medical knowledge combined with David's suspicious behavior created a picture that was becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss. That evening, I watched my husband more carefully than I had in years, noting details that I had previously taken for granted.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The way he checked his phone during dinner and quickly closed it when I glanced over, the slight hesitation before he answered when I asked about his day, the new habit of taking work calls in the garage instead of the living room. 3 days later, while David was at his monthly poker game with colleagues, I made a decision that would change everything. I drove to Millbrook General Hospital and approached the information desk with a story I had rehearsed a dozen times. I explained that my husband had received some genetic testing results, but had misplaced the paperwork, and I needed to understand what the testing had been for so I could help him follow up appropriately. The receptionist, a kind woman named Margaret who looked like she had been working at that desk since the hospital opened, explained that she couldn't provide specific medical information, but could confirm whether testing had been ordered and what type. When she pulled up David's file, her expression changed subtly, the professional smile becoming more guarded. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said carefully, "the testing that was performed was ordered by the family court system as part of a paternity determination case. The results were sent both to your husband and to the court-appointed representative handling the case." The floor seemed to shift beneath my feet as the implications hit me. David wasn't just hiding medical results. He was involved in a legal paternity case that had required court-ordered DNA testing. Somewhere in our small town, there was a child who might be biologically related to my husband, and a legal case that had progressed far enough to require genetic proof. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing through 28 years of marriage, searching for signs I might have missed. Had there been business trips that weren't really business trips? Late nights at the office that might have been spent elsewhere? Unexplained expenses or changes in our financial situation that could indicate child support payments? That night I waited until David was asleep before creeping down to his home office in the basement. For over 2 decades, this had been his private space where he handled our taxes, managed his work files, and pursued his hobby of restoring vintage fishing reels. I had always respected his need for a personal workspace, and rarely ventured down there except to do laundry in the adjacent utility room. The desk drawers were locked, which was unusual but not unprecedented, since David sometimes brought confidential insurance files home. However, I remembered that he kept a spare key taped under the desk from years ago, when Jessica was a curious toddler who got into everything. My hands shook as I felt around the dusty underside of the desk, until my fingers found the small piece of tape holding a tiny silver key. The bottom drawer contained exactly what I feared I would find. A manila folder labeled personal in David's careful handwriting contained bank statements for an account I had never known existed. Monthly withdrawals of $800 going back 15 years, all made on the same date each month, all categorized as family support. Mixed in with the financial documents were photographs that made my blood run cold. Pictures of David with a young woman who looked to be in her mid-20s, taken at various locations around Millbrook over what appeared to be several years. The woman had David's distinctive green eyes, in the same stubborn cowlick that both of our children had inherited. In some photos they were sitting together at the Blue Moon Diner on Main Street. In others, they were walking through downtown Millbrook or sitting on a park bench. The most recent photo showed them embracing outside Happy Paws Veterinary Clinic, where a small sign in the window read, "Emma Rodriguez, Veterinary Assistant." Emma Rodriguez was clearly David's daughter, and from the timeline of photographs and bank statements, he had been maintaining a relationship with her for years while keeping her existence completely hidden from me and our children. The monthly support payments, the secret meetings, the elaborate deception that had required him to live a double life for over a decade. I sat in that basement office until dawn, studying every document and photograph, trying to understand how the man I had shared my life with could have maintained such an enormous lie. The David in these photos looked genuinely happy, proud even, as he posed with this young woman who was clearly his biological daughter. This wasn't a case of a man reluctantly paying child support to avoid legal consequence. This was a father who had chosen to be involved in his daughter's life while completely excluding her from the rest of his family. The next morning, I called Linda and asked her to meet me for coffee at a diner in the next town over, somewhere we wouldn't be recognized or overheard. When I showed her the photographs and bank statements, her face went pale with shock and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Sarah," she said slowly, setting down her coffee cup with trembling hands, "I think I know who this girl is. Emma Rodriguez works at the veterinary clinic where I take my cat. She's been there for about 3 years, and she's always seemed familiar, but I could never place why. Now I know. She looks exactly like Jessica did at that age." The resemblance was undeniable once Linda pointed it out. Emma had the same heart-shaped face as our daughter, the same dimple in her left cheek, the same way of tilting her head when she smiled. She was Jessica's half-sister, and Ryan's too, and they had no idea she existed. Linda's medical background helped her guide me through the practical next step. We needed to understand the legal situation, determine how long this relationship had been going on, and figure out why David had chosen now to get DNA testing done. The court-ordered paternity test suggested that something had changed recently, some legal pressure that had forced David's hand. I spent the next week conducting my own investigation, while maintaining the facade of normal married life. I drove past Happy Paws Veterinary Clinic several times, working up the courage to go inside and meet Emma face to face. I researched public records for any legal proceedings involving David's name. I carefully examined our joint financial statements for any other irregularities or hidden accounts. What I discovered was a web of deception that was far more elaborate than I had initially imagined. David had been using his position at the insurance company to create false business expenses that covered his monthly support payments. He had established a post office box where Emma could send him letters and photographs. He had even listed her as a beneficiary on a life insurance policy that I knew nothing about. The breaking point came when I finally gathered the courage to visit Happy Paws and meet Emma in person. I brought our aging golden retriever, Max, in for a routine checkup, knowing that Emma would likely be the one to assist with the appointment. When she walked into the examination room, the resemblance to my own children was so striking that I felt dizzy. Emma was kind, professional, and genuinely caring with Max, explaining each step of the examination, and answering my questions with patience and expertise. She had David's compassionate nature, and his way of making people feel heard and understood. As we talked, I learned that she had been adopted as an infant, but had recently connected with her biological father through a private investigator she had hired. "I always wondered about my birth parents," Emma explained as she checked Max's heart. "My adoptive parents, Maria and Carlos Santos, gave me a wonderful life, but I couldn't shake the curiosity about where I came from. When I finally found my biological father last year, it was amazing to learn that I had inherited my love of animals from him. He told me he used to want to be a veterinarian when he was young." The casual way she mentioned her biological father made it clear that David had been lying to her as well. She had no idea that he was married with other children. She believed she was his only child, the secret daughter he had been forced to give up for adoption but had never stopped loving. The deception was hurting everyone involved, creating a false relationship built on lies that would eventually destroy multiple lives. That evening, I confronted David with everything I had discovered. I laid out the photographs, bank statements, and evidence of his double life on our kitchen table, and waited for him to come home from work. When he walked through the door and saw the documents spread before me, he looked like a man who had been expecting this moment for years. His confession was halting and filled with justifications that grew weaker with each explanation. The affair had happened during a rough patch in our marriage 26 years ago when I was struggling with fertility issues and depression. He had met Emma's birth mother, Lisa, at a conference in Columbus and had maintained a relationship with her for several months before she discovered she was pregnant. David claimed he had wanted to tell me about Emma but feared it would destroy our marriage at a time when we were already struggling. When Lisa decided to give the baby up for adoption, he thought the secret would die with that decision. But he had stayed in contact with the adoptive family and had eventually developed a relationship with Emma herself when she turned 18, and began searching for her biological parents. "I never meant for it to go on this long," David said, his voice breaking with emotion that seemed genuine but felt too little too late. "Every year I told myself I would find a way to tell you, to bring Emma into our family properly. But the longer I waited, the harder it became. How do you tell your wife of 20-plus years that you have a daughter you've been secretly supporting?" The answer to his question was simple: you don't wait 26 years. You don't lie to everyone involved. You don't create elaborate deceptions that require constant maintenance and hurt everyone who trusts you. But David had chosen the path of least resistance, which had ultimately become the path of greatest destruction. What made the betrayal even more painful was learning that Emma had been living just 15 minutes away for her entire life. She had grown up in the same school district where I taught, had shopped at the same grocery stores, had lived her whole life in the shadow of the family she didn't know existed. There had been hundreds of opportunities over the years for our paths to cross naturally, for David to find a way to integrate her into our lives honestly. Instead, he had chosen to compartmentalize his life in a way that required constant vigilance and deception. He had attended Emma's high school graduation while telling me he was at a work conference. He had helped her move into her first apartment while claiming he was helping a colleague with a family emergency. He had been present for the major milestones of her life while erasing those experiences from his life with me and our children. The most heartbreaking aspect of the discovery was imagining how Emma would feel when she lived the truth. She believed she had found a loving father who had been searching for her, who regretted giving her up for adoption, who wanted to be part of her life. The reality was far more complicated and potentially devastating. David hadn't been searching for her at all. He had known exactly where she was and had chosen to maintain a secret relationship rather than integrate her into his existing family. As the initial shock wore off, I began to think about the practical implications of David's deception. Our children deserved to know they had a half-sister. Emma deserved to know the truth about her biological father's family situation. The web of lies that had protected David's secret had created a situation where everyone involved was being hurt by the deception, even if they didn't know it yet. But there were still questions that David's confession hadn't answered. Why had there been court-ordered paternity testing? What legal pressure had forced him to submit to DNA analysis after years of maintaining his secret relationship with Emma? The timing suggested that something had changed recently, some external force that had made the secret impossible to maintain. When I pressed David for answers about the legal proceedings, his expression grew even more troubled. He explained that Emma had been contacted by investigators working on a cold case from 26 years ago. Someone had come forward with information suggesting that her birth mother, Lisa, hadn't died in a car accident as everyone had believed. The case had been reopened as a potential homicide, and Emma had been asked to provide DNA samples to help with the investigation. The court-ordered paternity test had been necessary to establish David's relationship to Emma so that his DNA could also be compared to evidence found at the scene of Lisa's death. What had started as a routine cold case review had suddenly become a murder investigation, with David and Emma both potentially connected to the victim. This revelation changed everything. David's secret wasn't just about infidelity and hidden children. It was now connected to a death that had occurred 26 years ago, just months after Emma's birth. The timeline was too convenient to be coincidental, and I found myself wondering what other secrets my husband had been keeping. The next morning, I called Detective Mark Sullivan at the Millbrook Police Department and requested a meeting. I had known Mark peripherally for years through community events and school functions, and I trusted his reputation for thoroughness and integrity. When I explained what I had discovered about David's secret daughter and the connection to a cold case investigation, his interest was immediate and intense. Detective Sullivan confirmed that the case of Lisa Martinez's death had been reopened based on new evidence suggesting that her fatal car accident might have been staged to cover up a homicide. Emma had been contacted as part of the investigation because she was Lisa's biological daughter, and the DNA comparison had revealed David's paternity, which had brought him into the investigation as well. Miss Mitchell, Detective Sullivan said carefully, I need to ask you some difficult questions about your husband's whereabouts and behavior 26 years ago. We're trying to establish a timeline of events surrounding Lisa Martinez's death, and David's relationship with her makes him a person of interest in the case. The questions that followed were unlike anything I had ever imagined being asked about my husband. Where had David been on specific dates in October night? Had I noticed any changes in his behavior or mood during that time period? Were there any unexplained absences or unusual expenses that I could remember from that time? 26 years was a long time to remember specific details, but some moments stick in your memory forever. I remembered that David had been unusually stressed during the fall of 1998, claiming that work pressures were overwhelming him. He had taken several unexpected business trips during that period, some of them lasting 3 or 4 days. There had been a few occasions when I couldn't reach him at his hotel, and he had explained that he had been out late with clients or in areas with poor cell phone coverage. At the time, these explanations had seemed reasonable. David worked in insurance, which often required meeting with clients who had experienced traumatic events. It wasn't unusual for him to be unreachable during site visits or when dealing with particularly complicated claims. But in the context of Detective Sullivan's questions, those same incidents took on a much more sinister significance. As our conversation continued, I learned more about Lisa Martinez and her connection to Dave. She had been 24 years old when she died, working as a paralegal at a law firm in Columbus. She had met David at an insurance industry conference where she was representing her firm's clients in some complex liability case. Their affair had lasted approximately 4 months, ending shortly before her death. According to the original police investigation, Lisa had been driving home from work on a rainy October evening when she lost control of her car on a curve and crashed into a tree. The accident had seemed straightforward, and there had been no reason to suspect foul play. Lisa was known to be a careful driver, but the road conditions were poor, and single-car accidents weren't uncommon in that area. The case had been reopened when construction workers renovating an old building in Columbus had found a storage unit containing Lisa's personal belongings, including journals and letters that suggested she had been afraid of someone in the weeks before her death. The journals mentioned a married man she had been involved with who had become increasingly possessive and controlling when she tried to end the relationship. Emma's birth certificate listed father unknown, but Lisa's journals contained enough details to identify David through the private investigator that Emma had hired. The DNA testing had confirmed the paternity, but it had also raised new questions about David's involvement in Lisa's death. Detective Sullivan was careful not to make accusations, but the implications were clear. David had been in a relationship with a woman who had died under suspicious circumstances just months after giving birth to his child. He had then maintained a secret relationship with that child for over 20 years while never mentioning the mother's death to anyone, including Emma herself. When I asked what evidence suggested that Lisa's death might have been murder rather than an accident, Detective Sullivan's expression grew grave. The storage unit had contained letters from David that became increasingly threatening as Lisa tried to end their relationship. In the final letter dated just 2 weeks before her death, David had written that he couldn't let her destroy everything, and that some problems require permanent solutions. The letter was enough to obtain a search warrant for our home and David's office. 2 days later, I watched from our front porch as investigators methodically searched through 28 years of our married life, looking for evidence that my husband might be a murderer. Neighbors gathered on their porches and sidewalks, whispering among themselves as police cars and forensic vans filled our quiet street. The search revealed more than anyone had expected. Hidden in the walls of David's basement office, investigators found additional documents related to Lisa Martinez, including photographs of her that had been taken without her knowledge, and detailed notes about her daily routine. There were maps of the area where she had died, with the accident site marked and several potential alternate routes highlighted. Most damning of all, they found Lisa's missing jewelry box, which family members had reported stolen from her apartment after her death. The jewelry box contained items that had significant sentimental value but little monetary worth, suggesting that whoever had taken it had known Lisa personally and understood what the pieces meant to her. David was arrested that evening as he returned home from work. I watched from our living room window as Detective Sullivan read him his rights in our driveway, the same spot where David had taught our children to ride bicycles and where we had stood together watching 4th of July fireworks for nearly 3 decades. The man being led away in handcuffs looked like a stranger to me. This wasn't the devoted husband and father I had shared my life with. This wasn't the man who had comforted me through my mother's illness or celebrated our children's achievements with genuine pride and joy. This was someone who had been capable of murder, who had hidden that capacity behind a facade of normalcy for 26 years. As the police cars disappeared around the corner, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my life had been an illusion. The man I had loved and trusted had not only betrayed me with another woman, but had potentially killed her when she threatened to expose their relationship. The secret daughter I had just discovered was the child of a murder victim, and her entire relationship with David had been built on lies that went far deeper than simple infidelity. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal proceedings, media attention, and attempts to process the magnitude of David's deception. Emma came forward publicly, revealing her connection to the case and expressing her shock at learning the truth about her birth mother's death. The young woman I had met at the veterinary clinic was now thrust into a nightmare that would change her life forever. Our children, Jessica and Ryan, struggled to understand how their father could have hidden such enormous secrets from them. The man who had coached Ryan's Little League team and helped Jessica with her college applications was now facing charges of first-degree murder. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming for all of us. Emma and I met several times during the investigation, 2 women trying to make sense of how David had manipulated and deceived us both. She had believed she had found a loving father who regretted giving her up for adoption. I had believed I was married to a man of integrity who valued honesty and family above all else. Both of us had been victims of his elaborate deceptions. The prosecution's case continued to strengthen as more evidence emerged. Forensic analysis of Lisa's car revealed that it had been tampered with, making the crash appear accidental when it had actually been sabotaged. Witnesses came forward who had seen David in the area on the night of Lisa's death, despite his claims that he had been working late at his office in Millbrook. Phone records from 1998 showed a pattern of increasingly frequent calls between David and Lisa in the weeks before her death, followed by a sudden stop on the day she died. Financial records revealed that David had withdrawn large amounts of cash during that time period, money that was never accounted for and could have been used to pay for services related to Lisa's murder. The motive became clear through Lisa's journals and letters. She had discovered she was pregnant just as she was trying to end the affair with David. When she told him about the pregnancy, he had initially pressured her to have an abortion. When she refused, he had tried to convince her to continue their relationship and raise the child together, which would have required him to leave me and our children. Lisa had made it clear that she wanted to give the baby up for adoption and end all contact with David. She had threatened to tell me about the affair if he continued to pressure her. In David's mind, Lisa had become a threat to everything he valued: his marriage, his family, his reputation in our small community. Rather than accept the consequences of his actions, he had chosen to eliminate the threat permanently. The revelation that connected Emma to her birth father's crime scene came through DNA evidence found on items in Lisa's apartment. Hair and skin cells that had been preserved in evidence storage for 26 years matched David's genetic profile. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling, especially when combined with the threatening letters and stolen jewelry box. Emma's decision to provide DNA for the cold case investigation had inadvertently provided the key that unlocked the truth about her birth mother's death. In trying to learn more about her biological parents, she had exposed the man she thought was her loving father as her mother's killer. The trial began 8 months after David's arrest, and the prosecution presented a compelling case of premeditated murder motivated by David's desire to protect his double life. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that David was being convicted based on speculation rather than facts, but the accumulation of evidence was overwhelming. The threatening letters, the stolen jewelry, the DNA evidence, the witness testimony, and the financial records all pointed to David as Lisa's killer. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder. David was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the judge read the sentence, I looked at the man I had been married to for 28 years and saw a strange. The capacity for violence and deception that had been hidden beneath his facade of normalcy was finally exposed for everyone to see. The aftermath of the trial brought both closure and new challenges. Emma and I had developed a relationship built on our shared experience of being deceived by David, but we also had to navigate the complex emotions of her being the daughter of the woman my husband had murdered. Our children struggled with the shame and confusion of having a father who was a convicted killer. The house on Maple Street that had been our family home for over 2 decades now felt like a crime scene. Every room contained memories that had been contaminated by the knowledge of what David had been capable of. I eventually sold the house and moved to a smaller place across town, starting over at an age when I had expected to be settled in the life David and I had built together. Emma has become an unexpected part of our family, the sister that Jessica and Ryan never knew they had. The relationship is complicated by the circumstances of how we found each other, but there is genuine affection and connection between them. In some ways, Emma's presence has helped heal the wounds left by David's betrayal, showing us that some good can come from even the darkest revelation. The story of David's crimes and 26 years of deception has become a cautionary tale in our community about the dangers of keeping secrets and the ways that lies can compound over time until they become deadly. The Blue Moon Diner where David had met secretly with Emma now displays a memorial plaque for Lisa Martinez, ensuring that her story is not forgotten. Looking back on 28 years of marriage, I can see signs that I missed or dismissed as insignificant. The business trips that were never quite explained in detail. The occasional phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. The way David sometimes seemed distant or preoccupied, as if he was managing thoughts and concerns that he couldn't share. But I also have to accept that some deceptions are so complete and well-maintained that even the people closest to the deceiver cannot detect them. David had spent decades perfecting his double life, creating systems and safeguards that allowed him to compartmentalize his relationships and responsibility. The man who killed Lisa Martinez and the man who coached Little League Baseball were the same person, but he had learned to keep those aspects of his personality completely separate. The investigation revealed that David had been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder during a psychological evaluation in prison, a condition that explained his ability to maintain such elaborate deceptions without apparent guilt or remorse. The diagnosis provided some context for his behavior but couldn't undo the damage he had caused to so many lives. Emma has chosen to keep the Rodriguez surname from her adoptive parents rather than taking the Mitchell name, a decision that I completely understand and support. She has also decided to pursue her original dream of becoming a veterinarian, using her experience with the criminal justice system to motivate her studies and career goals. The secret that David kept for 26 years ultimately led investigators to evidence that solved a murder case and brought justice for Lisa Martinez. Emma's decision to search for her biological father had unintended consequences that revealed the truth about her birth mother's death and her father's capacity for violence. As I rebuild my life without the man I thought I knew, I carry with me the lessons learned from this experience. The importance of questioning inconsistencies rather than dismissing them. The value of honest relationships over comfortable lies. The recognition that evil can hide behind a facade of normalcy for decades before being exposed. The burial ground that David led police to wasn't just the site where evidence was hidden. It was the place where the truth about his character was finally unearthed after 26 years of deception. Emma's search for her identity had accidentally led to the exposure of her birth father's greatest secret, and her birth mother's final resting place in justice. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.